Well, hi everybody. Welcome to the 8 values of highly productive companies. We've got a very interesting audience online. I know some of you have come back from previous webinars or broadcasts, and I appreciate that. We've got people from local government. We've got people from private enterprise. We've got a selection of consultants. We've got some international guests, which I appreciate and welcome whatever time it might be there. So we've got a very eclectic group to listen to this broadcast, so I hope that you can get something of value from it. As the normal process in these webinars is if you've got a question, and I'm encouraging you to have questions, then I suggest that you go to the right hand side and you'll notice there that there's a little drop-down box where you can actually record your question. So do that through the broadcast at any particular time, and then what will happen is at the end I'll have about 10 to 15 minutes and I'll go through and answer those, because if you leave it till the last minute, of course, we'll be waiting for you to respond. So if you're having trouble hearing me, can you send me a little message? That might also be helpful as well. So I'll just back out of the video and we'll go into the broadcast itself. Okay. So basically there's a number of things that I'd like you to get out of this presentation today or this evening, and I guess the first thing I want to do is define what the agile organization looks like, or the agile enterprise. As you're probably aware, there are lots and lots of books written on this topic, and there are lots and lots of explanations or definitions, if you like, of what an agile organization looks like. Obviously, it's critical to be an agile organization because you need to be able to flex and change depending on what the external environment is offering you at any particular time. So we'll have a look at that. We will look at some management myths that are actually blocking agility around organizations, and what I'm going to do is share with you 8 myths that managers have harbored for the last 100 years, and you might like to actually think about your own organization and how applicable these myths might be to your organization, and consider how you might overcome those, which I certainly will do. We will look at what I call, or not me personally, I didn't come up with the term, but we'll look at the concept of the psychological contract. And at the end of the day, I think the psychological contract is the critical aspect in terms of being able to create the culture which will actually support these 8 values that I'm going to share with you very shortly. And of course, I'm going to share with you what the ideal culture is, which essentially is about these 8 values that I'm going to share, and these 8 values actually are diametrically opposite to the values that have been around for 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. And so it's a major change to be able to move from a traditional working relationship, that is a psychological contract, to a new psychological contract, but we'll have a look at that. Now, I'll share with you some benchmarks which you might find very useful, because you can take these benchmarks away with you and start measuring your own organization, and I think that can be very useful because you've got to start somewhere. And if you can actually start, so if you're a consultant and you're going into an organization, you can apply these benchmarks if you're looking at the organization from the point of view of wanting to improve their culture. So that pretty much is our presentation for the hour. As I said, I'll finish 10 minutes early and give people an opportunity to, I'll certainly be responding to questions, so you just jot them into the question box when you think of them. Okay, now I've got a 7th book coming out this year. We haven't got a date, or haven't got a time yet, but I do know it's this year, from Palgrave Macmillan, and the book has got the title Performance Management in Agile Organizations. So you're the very first audience, if you like, that have actually seen this model that I put together, and this is a model of agility. So when you go into an organization and you say, well, that's an agile organization, or that's not, or a rigid organization, whatever you want to use as the opposite, there are actually 7 particular dimensions, if you like, to agility, so that it gives you a chance to consider agility from 7 different perspectives, if you like. So I just want to run through these, if I may, briefly, because I think the very first thing we want to do during this presentation is identify what agile performance actually looks like, so that we can start to understand what we're aiming to do here. So if I start at the top here where there is innovation, so these first 3, innovation, processing and recovery, have all got to do with speed. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but at the end of the day, an agile organization is fast into the workplace, or sorry, into the marketplace with their new services and their new products. In fact, much faster than their competitors. The faster an organization can deliver their new concepts into the workplace, of course, the quicker they can get a competitive advantage. That is, of course, if they are a private sector organization. The best example of that, of course, is Apple, in terms of their touchscreen technology. They were the first to develop that. They got a huge advantage, what I call an adaptive advantage, by being in the marketplace very quickly, and that's an example of what I mean by innovation speed or innovation agility. Now, processing speed is how quickly we can get things done in our organisation. Now, I note that we have some people here from the public sector, and you know, I guess one of the criticisms that people in the public might make of a public sector organisation is that it takes too long to get things done, or the process is, you know, too long. So one of the challenges, obviously, for a manager in a public sector agency is to try to reduce the amount of time it takes to process whatever it is. There's a whole bunch of processes that need to be met. Now, of course, in a public sector organisation, there is an important aspect of public accountability, and obviously not only have you got to be doing the right thing, you've got to be seen to be doing the right thing, and processing speed has its challenges in those organisations that have that constraint. So doing things faster is still important, but nevertheless difficult. We have recovery speed. Now, this is an interesting dimension of agility because every one of us are working with or in organisations where mistakes are made. And the fact of the matter is those mistakes will continue to be made in the future. They're not likely to, we're not likely to be able to stop all mistakes. So the question then really becomes, how can we recover from our mistakes quickly? That's the question. And most customers, or most members of the public, are going to be very forgiving of a mistake if they know that the organisation is dealing with it with priority and they're dealing with it with speed. And if people can sort that out quickly, then most people will forgive the organisation for making the mistake in the first place, depending, of course, on what it is. So being able to recover from mistakes has to be a dimension of agility that's important. Now we move on to continuous improvement. Big difference between, not big difference, but there is a difference between continuous improvement and innovation. Innovation is around creating something new, whereas continuous improvement is around actually developing or improving on something of old. So continuous improvement is how do we do things faster, better, with more agility, with more safety, with more interpersonal cooperation and so forth. They're the questions around that. So any organisation that's agile is actually continuously improving all the time, consciously. Now, the next area is customer responsiveness. Now, I don't think anyone would be surprised that I've included that as a dimension of agile performance. How responsive someone is to the needs of either members of the public or their customers is absolutely critical to the organisation. Now, not everything that the customer wants, of course, is something that can be done via a process. In fact, there are more and more inquiries that people are getting in organisations that are out of the blue, out of the box, whatever you want to call it. They're not really stock standard requests. So training people to be able to think on their feet and be able to respond even though there isn't a set process in place has to be an aspect of agility that's critically important. And of course, not dissimilar from that is the ability to solve problems, and to be able to do that in a way that can critically analyse the problem and come up with a solution, all with speed, all with some degree of creativity, and all with the capacity to be able to store that information for future reference, so that if that problem arises again, something can be done about it to solve the problem. And of course, the final one there is changing direction, which is a big picture dimension, and all organisations, whether they're public sector or private sector, are in the business of changing direction to meet the changing circumstances of the economy and the public and their needs. So an organisation's got to be flexible and manoeuvrable, and obviously that becomes a critically important dimension around organisational agility. So that's my model of agility, and so I think you can sort of analyse your own organisations around those 7. There's probably things there that you're doing extremely well. There are probably things that aren't being done that well, and you can start to work on some of those dimensions that perhaps aren't working particularly well for you. So moving right along, I guess another way of looking at this is that if you were looking at, and of course the traditional way that we actually measure performance is through profitability, but of course profitability doesn't apply necessarily to the public sector. So therefore this definition, I just wanted to challenge you with this, and it includes 3 dimensions of what I just referred to. So how quickly are you to come up with new and better ways of doing things? How good are you at processing information through your organisation? And how good are you at recovering from mistakes that are made across the organisation? This is a great place to start if you're starting to work with agility. And you can use critical incidents from, something, for example, that's gone wrong, and without pointing fingers of blame, you can actually talk to a group of people and say, all right, this has happened, let's put aside, who's responsible or whatever. Let's actually talk about how we can prevent this from happening again. What needs to go in place? How might we do this? And so forth. So that's the kind of thing that can be used for a conversation. But you'll notice the 3 denominators, the key denominators there are speed. So it's all about doing things faster. And if you can do things faster, then that has to be a critical aspect of agility. All right, what I want to do now is go through these 8 myths that block agile performance. So what are they? And some of these myths might be a bit challenging for you because you may have been operating on these myths for a considerable amount of time. Now, one of the great myths about organisations is that the best way to improve performance is to specialise. So if we give everyone a nice, neat job description with a finite set of tasks to do, and send people off in the direction we can hold them accountable for those tasks. This very much came out of scientific management in the early part of the last century, when Frederick Taylor went into the assembly lines in the Ford Motor Company and other companies and basically looked at each aspect of the assembly line and tried to quarantine what particular tasks needed to be done in that aspect on the assembly line, and what standard could they be done, and how would they be done, and how would they be measured. And of course we still do that. The problem of course with that now is that when people take responsibility for one patch in an organisation, by definition they're not interested in any other patch because that's how they're held accountable. So of course most things that occur in organisations cross different specialties. So it's no wonder we have a whole lot of finger pointing and problems with people saying, well, that's not my responsibility, that's yours. And really all the customer wants is you to fix the problem. So that's one. Now, there is an element of truth to all these myths, so I'm not suggesting we throw these out. All right, what I'm suggesting to you is that we build upon them. So I still think there's a place for specialisation, but if that's our only yardstick, then we've got trouble. we've actually got to flexibly deploy people's capacity, so they should be able to do a series of things that aren't directly related to their specified role. Another myth we operate on is that quality systems and processes guarantee good outcomes. So if we can get the right systems in place, dotting I's and crossing T's, what will happen is that the end result will be consistent, and therefore we can control the end result. And of course, the best example that you can think of is the McDonald's franchising system, that everything is, the processes are built in to the system for everything, so that by the time the hamburger comes out the other end, it tastes the same, that is, it has the same quality as it would in any other store in the world. So that system, obviously, in some industries is very, very useful. But the problem with that, of course, is that the customer now is far more fickle, far more demanding, and has myriad choices. So therefore, organisations that are agile need to have quality systems in place, absolutely. But to just simply rely on those to produce results is misguided. We need two systems going. We need an external focus and we need an internal focus. And I'll come back to these, of course, later. The third myth that blocks agile performance is that the job description helps an employee understand their organisational role. No, it doesn't. It helps them understand the technical requirements of what they're expected to do, but it doesn't actually help them become better organisational citizens. In fact, if anything, it actually detracts from that. I have a strong view that we should be moving towards role descriptions, not job descriptions. Now, a role description encompasses two dimensions of work. One dimension is the technical dimension, which of course is covered by the job description itself, and the other dimension is the non-job dimension, which covers essentially a number of things that people are expected to do that are non-job. For example, they're expected to work in teams. They're expected to come to work with a fairly positive attitude and frame of mind. They're expected to come to work wanting to grow and develop their skills, and they're expected to come to work wanting to help develop the organisation and to improve it. These things are not normally embedded in the job description, and if they are, they're usually dot points at the end of the document after the significant space or real estate, or the significant amount of space is taken up talking about KPIs and the detail around people's technical aspects. So obviously what people think then is, well, these other things that I mentioned aren't particularly important because either they're only mentioned in bullet point form or they're not mentioned at all. So why don't we join both non-job and job performance together and create a more comprehensive definition of performance? A business is best organised around functions. Well, I know a lot of your businesses are. You know, we've got the engineering or the outdoor department, and we've got the accounting department, we've got the marketing department. The problem with all that is that a CEO or a senior manager is spending all of their time and energy trying to get people to look outside their functional area and to try and work together as a team, because the department breeds this concept that we have a separate entity within a bigger business. So I think that I'll share with you a model that I think might be helpful there, which is dramatically different to what we normally use. Myth number 5, a satisfied employee is a productive employee. Well, I use the analogy of a country club. I'm not a member of a country club, but I imagine that people are pretty satisfied there. And they probably aren't particularly productive either. So being satisfied doesn't actually lead necessarily to being productive. In fact, it can be the opposite. So what we need to do is to intrinsically motivate people. And I know that's a challenge because we all talk about engaged employees, but what we reward people with is a carrot and a stick. We reward people with a salary and conditions. I'm not suggesting we don't pay people, but that's as far as we go. And we wonder why people aren't coming to work excited and bouncing off the walls, because we're actually approaching that the wrong way. And I think it's about time we started to look very seriously at how we can best engage the hearts and minds of people. I think there's too much superficial nonsense that's written about this topic. A loyal employee is an asset to a business. Well, no, they're not actually. A loyal employee will defend the systems and processes that they are used to in the organisation. That's why they're loyal. And some of those systems and processes may not be very effective. A loyal employee will play organisational politics to make sure that they please their boss. So we're not really after loyal employees. In fact, the average person now is spending less than 2 years in the one workplace, and that's getting shorter and shorter time frame. So the whole idea of loyalty is pretty much old hat. Loyalty does not lead to productivity, so we need to actually look for committed employees rather than loyal, and there is a difference. A technically competent workplace is a pathway to a high-performing workplace. Technical skills obviously are important. I don't think anyone doubts that. But if your whole learning and development regime is just there to help people become better skilled at the technical aspects of what they do, you're missing, I would suggest, 2/3 of the opportunities there. I would suggest that you're not helping them develop themselves as people, and then you're not actually helping them think for themselves. In other words, having a little bit of creative thought process. So technical is fine to a certain extent, but it doesn't achieve everything in a workplace. And we all know technically competent people who are a pain in the you-know-what to work with, but they've got good technical skills, and they can be very costly because they they haven't developed themselves beyond the technical confines of what they do. And the final myth is that employees can't be trusted with sensitive information. And so what happens is that managers will often say, well, if we don't tell you, you don't need to know, or another favourite of mine is, you'll get told on a need-to-know basis. And then that's fine, but then we expect people to turn around and show initiative. It can't work both ways. We can't starve people of information and then expect people to show initiative. Some employees can't be trusted with sensitive information. I know that there are some managers that can't be trusted with sensitive information either. But the assumption that employees can't be trusted, so we won't tell them, is a false assumption. And I realise there's more employees than managers, and the risk perhaps is greater that there might be a leak to the unions, or there might be a leak to the media or something. But at the end of the day, the price that we pay for not informing people of what we're doing and keeping people in the dark is a huge price to pay if we're really interested in becoming agile. So there's the 8 myths. I go into those in great detail with my book that's coming out later this year. But I just want to set the scene so that you understand why we've set these 8 values the way we have. So let me spend a bit of time on this contract, this psychological contract. Psychological, though some of you, of course, would know what I'm talking about, others of you don't. So let me just explain. A psychological contract, psychological meaning it's in your head, and contract meaning an agreement between 2 or more entities. So this is a contract that's between an individual employee and an organisation that's not necessarily written down. It's an expectation that people have of the other entity in the relationship. So, for example, the individual employee has an expectation around what management will do for them. For example, a very basic expectation is that the manager will treat them fairly, will pay them on time, and will not, abuse their labour. That's a baseline expectation. It's not necessarily written down anywhere. It's just something that employees believe is a reasonable expectation. Now, from the organisation's point of view, the organisation expects perhaps that the employee will turn up on time, that they will give a fair day's work, that they will cause few problems, and so forth. So these are unwritten expectations that we have of both parties. Now, my argument is a simple one, that if you're looking at changing the culture of your workplace, the place to look is the psychological contract. At the end of the day, this is the heart and soul. This is the linchpin upon which your organisation operates. And I see too many organisations going off and introducing free massages and trinkets and all sorts of things, hoping that those things will actually, all of a sudden improve the organisation, the culture of the organisation. I mean, those things are appreciated, but they're not sustainable. You have to start with the psychological contract. So the 8 values are really around values that are shared by both the manager or the leader and the individual employee. So the contract is critically important in changing culture. Now, this is a very busy slide, and I'm just going to talk about perhaps the first one at the top there, because it's quite busy. But essentially, what this is doing is creating a framework, as it says up the top, of what the traditional psychological contract looks like. This is the framework that's been around for 200 plus years since the birth of industry. This is the framework that was reinforced and consolidated during Taylorism in the early part of the 20th century. And this is the framework that's based on the false management, the false assumptions or management myths that I went through earlier. So in this column, in the first column, you'll notice that these are the myths that I've just gone through. And what I've done here is I've said, okay, how can we distill that down to a shared value? And by shared value, what I simply mean is a value that's shared by both management and employees. So, for example, and I'm just going to use the first one, and I won't go through them all, but you've got job specification improves performance. So that's the management myth, and Taylor certainly accelerated that myth by his time and space motion studies. And we have a shared value which is around specialised employment. So the management expectation, this is what managers expect of employees. The manager expects that people would be willing to work in a clearly defined and specialised employment area. So that's the basic expectation under the traditional contract. The employee's expectation is that they expect managers will offer clearly defined and specialised employment opportunities. So in other words, the linchpin or the pivot or the value is specialised employment. So you can see that what I've done is created a framework around what it has looked like for 2 centuries. Now, you could probably work out that this framework is not conducive to agile performance. So we actually have to move away from this, and we have to move to a new contract in order to create the agile performance that I'm suggesting in those 7 dimensions at the beginning of the broadcast. Won't go through them all, but it's all there for you to read in the book. Now, let me just simply make the point that if you look at the traditional people management practices in any organisation, you can probably categorize them around the following. Okay, what's on your screen there. Now, what happens is that the psychological contract will actually affect and influence all of those practices. Can I give you an example? If you take the shared value of performance focus, which was on the previous screen, if we have a shared value of performance focus, for example, which is really about the, I should say job focus, if we're about job focus rather than performance focus, let's say that we're focused on the job. Let's have a look at how that impacts on these things. So when we recruit people and we select them, we focus on the technical aspects of what they do. So all our questions in the interview and all our ratings are around their technical capacity. Now that's fine to a certain extent, but what happens and what gets ignored is all the non-job capacities that we've talked about, their ability to work with other people, their ability to think outside the square, their ability to lead people. All of those things get left off the list because we're so focused on a job on the job in the recruitment. So we recruit people on a technical basis. We induct them, and we induct them talking about the technical requirements of their job. So we probably don't talk much about culture or expectations. It's really just around the technical aspects of what we do. And then, of course, when we train and develop these individuals later on, when they've got their feet under the desk, we train them in the technical requirements of their job. We give very little focus on personal development, very little focus on problem-based learning, and it's very much around the technical aspects of their work. You can see how this psychological contract can hugely impact all of the practices that we do. Of course, we remunerate people on the basis of their technical skills, and what we do is that we have succession planning and promotion in place based on people's technical skills. So we promote people to managerial roles based on whether they're a good engineer or not, when the skills of being a manager or a leader are completely different and foreign to that. That's a huge issue. And of course, and a lot of employees will strive to be managers and leaders because they know that that's the only way they're going to increase their income. So we have a whole bunch of people who are leaders in organisations who don't have the aptitude based on a psychological contract. And then, of course, when we review people, we review them pretty much on their technical input, and so poor behaviour gets bypassed often, and some of those non-technical things that we talked about. So you can see, and of course I haven't included here, but if we have to dismiss somebody, we try to do that based on their technical mishaps rather than their non-technical, because we think that through a court of law it's far more defensible. So we will find fault in their technical behaviour when in actual fact it's not their technical behaviour, it's the problem, it's their non-technical. So you can see that the psychological contract affects everything that we do in an organisation, which is a real concern. So what are these 8 values? Okay, let's look at them. So you can, all of that is really to build up to say this is the rationale for why we have the values that I'm going to share with you. The old value, which was on a previous slide, a very busy slide, was specialised employment. So the new value is flexible deployment. So we want people certainly that have a specialisation that are able to use that specialisation in a range of different settings and contexts. So multi-skilling is a classic example of flexible deployment. The ability to move people from position to position. Arguably, any leader in any organisation should be able to move or swap with another leader in an area that they're not technically good at, on the basis that leadership is not about the technical requirements of the job, it's very much around the leadership aspect. So obviously, if you're looking at agile performance, you want a flexibly deployed workplace. Internal focus, which is around the quality control process in the latter part of the last century, was critical. So QA gained a whole momentum of its own. And once again, I'm not suggesting we throw QA out the door, but if we just believe that that's the only value in town, we're going to be in strife. So what's the new value? The new value is customer focus, and that can be characterised as everything I think, say and do has the end user in mind. How many of your organisations could you actually say that that's true? Everything I say, think and do has the end user in mind. That's what we should be striving for. So it's not about customer service, it's about a focus wholly and solely on the end user. We still have systems in place, we still have internal focus, but the focus internally must also be a focus on the customer. The third value that's critical is, as I said before, the focus on the job, and you saw the damage that that had, all of those practices that I went through, and you could see how that was affecting negatively all of those particular practices in workplaces. So what's the new one? The new one is a focus on performance, not a focus on the job. So what I'm saying is performance is far bigger than just the job that people do. People are expected to be organisational citizens and do certain things in the workplace, so we expect people to perform beyond just their job. Certainly we don't want people that aren't technically competent, but we just don't want technically competent people either. Okay, moving right along. Functional-based work gives way to project-based work. We should be starting to think about our organisational structures and how we can actually be much more project-based, and I'm going to show you a model that might assist you with that. Human spirit and work. Any job's a good job, or job satisfaction. Surely we're after human spirit and work, aren't we? After people that bring their brains to work with them, their hearts and minds. We want people excited and engaged in what they do. And I think one of the reasons we're having trouble with that is we're approaching it the wrong way. And perhaps in one of my future webinars I'll get into that in more detail. In fact, I will. I did mention earlier about loyalty. We don't want loyal employees. We want committed employees. In other words, a committed employee is one who says, you scratch my back and I will scratch yours. In other words, it's a pragmatic exchange. In other words, I want something from the organisation, and in return you will get something from me. And what that something will be is help you achieve your ends, and as a result of that I want some career and personal growth and development. So look, if you can find a loyal and committed employee, that's fantastic, but the chances are you won't. And if you had a choice between the two, all things being equal, and you're after agile performance, then you've got to be favouring the committed employee. Training is really, what I mean by training as a value is more around the technical aspects of what people do. Now the new value is learning and development, which is a much more comprehensive approach to learning and development. You know, in other words, it's about 3 dimensions. It is the technical centered approach, the person centered approach, and the problem centered approach. So we actually need 1/3 of the budget on technical, 1/3 of the budget on non-technical personal development, and 1/3 of the budget on learning to solve problems. Closed information. Remember we talked about I need to be told on a need to know basis. Now must give way to an open information channels. So there are the 8 values. Have a think about your own organisation. How closely are you aligned? I think most of you, as I have found when I travel around to organisations, and I work across 21 industries, most organisations are in flux between the old and the new. And so that adds a whole degree of confusion, because some employees are more on the left-hand side and some managers are on the right-hand side, and vice versa. Some managers still think on the left-hand side, and we've got some younger employees who have expectations on the right-hand side. And this explains a lot of the conflict that's going on in workplaces right now. Okay, so I might just leave this because it's quite a busy slide and it's really just an introduction. So let's get down to, I want to share with you a couple of practical things that you can do now that would make a difference in terms of realigning your organisation with the new psychological framework, contract framework that I have just gone over very quickly. Let's talk about functional-based work versus project-based work. Now, as you know, project-based work is one of the values of the agile performing organisation. Now, what's happened is that we started on the left-hand side with the functional-based organisational chart. In fact, when I ask most people to show me their organisational chart, they will still have the old hierarchy, you know, the CEO's on top and you've got 3 people, 4 people reporting to them, and then you've got departments underneath there. So most organisations are still operating that way. Some of them have tried to move to what's called a matrix model, where you've still got the silos up the top there, but you've also got some of the particular projects running parallel. So that effectively what it means is you've got individuals who have two bosses. One is the so-called product boss and the other is the functional boss. Now, I've seen examples of where it works well, but the common criticism about the matrix model is that people are confused about who they report to about what, and also that the leaders themselves are confused about how they might lead in those areas. So the matrix model has had a patchy history, and some of you might be using that successfully, but I've seen plenty of examples where it's not worked. So these two models aren't particularly helpful. They're not working as well as we would like. This one here, of course, the silo one, the problem, of course, is that these departments don't talk to each other. And, of course, most things that happen in the community or in the marketplace actually cross several particular boundaries. So therefore, and then of course that's where the problem is, that because people aren't talking to each other, the problem falls between two departments or two teams. So that doesn't work particularly well. Here is another approach that you might like to consider, and you know, it's quite a radical departure from the other two. But have a think about this. Why don't you just get a pen and a paper out if you're responsible for this and start toying with this organisationally? You might be pleasantly surprised what you can come up with. But you'll notice the first important thing here is there's a series of concentric circles, and you'll notice that right in the middle is the customer. So instead of having most organisational charts, the customer is not even mentioned, which if you actually think about it is quite ridiculous, whether it's public sector or private sector. So we throw the customer or the ratepayer or the taxpayer or whoever you want to call it, let's throw them right in the middle. And then let's start to work out from there. So we've obviously got some frontline staff that deal. Now, what are these dotted lines? These are the functional areas. So this still might be the engineering department, this might be the marketing department, this might be the admin department, and so forth. So you've still got departments, but the dotted line would suggest that whilst they exist, they're not the most important sort of layer of management, if you like, in the organisation. So yes, we do have them, and as I said, this is not about throwing out the old and bringing in the new. This is about building on what we've already got. So you've got frontline staff. So clearly you're going to have some managers in there and you're going to have some employees in there. So that's your frontline. Then of course you've got some operations people who are basically building whatever it needs or, you know, putting together the service requirements for the frontline staff. So they're obviously going to work together. Now, this is where I depart slightly. You've got projects. So what I'm suggesting here is that you have a whole series of project teams. And who are in these project teams? Basically, the idea would be that everybody in an organisation should be involved in one project team. Now, they don't suck up all the time that people, you know, they might meet once a month, for example, but they are working on a particular project. So one project might be working on rewards and recognition. So how can we improve rewards and recognition in this organisation? One project might be working on workplace culture. Another project might be working on, you know, improving the quality of service to the customer. So you have all these projects operating, and so employees are both functionally based and project based. And you'll notice strategic, that's the senior management. So senior management are here, they're close to the projects, they're overseeing the whole operation, and I think you'll find if you toy around with something like that, you may come up with a better configuration that will suit your needs of your organisation. So just food for thought. Now, the last value, which is of course open information, the problem that, and I'll just talk about this as an example, of course managers say, I'll tell you on a need-to-know basis. Now here's the problem, let's just follow this through. The initiative paradox is an interesting paradox. This is the paradox where at the beginning the leaders want initiative from employees. Okay, so we all want our employees to show more enterprise, and employees want to display initiative. So we're actually on the same page. We start out on the same page. Employees want to think for themselves. Managers want employees to think for themselves. Now something goes wrong. So what actually happens in the next phase is that leaders invite employees to show initiative, and the employees are skeptical about this because it's only said once in a blue moon. So what happens? The employees think, oh, that's just talk. I don't think they really mean that. I don't think they're serious. So we're not going to do anything and we'll play it safe. We will do things by the book. And what managers do then, down in this phase, is they think, well, hang on a minute. I asked employees to show initiative and they didn't. So I'm going to fill the void. I'm actually going to get involved and micromanage this process because, quite frankly, the vacuum has to be filled. So they fill it, they take control, and the employee observes this behaviour and thinks to themselves, there you go, my skepticism was validated. The managers did not really want to be and didn't want us to show initiative because if they did, they wouldn't be involved. So it's a sort of a yin and yang dance, and the whole key, of course, is to break that cycle. But that's another dimension that's based very much on the traditional psychological contract, because there's a starvation of information and the employee becomes suspicious. Okay, just want to finish up now before we, so if you've got any questions, as I said, pop them into the question box and I'm more than happy to address those as we go. So let me run through some of the, we've got some questions up there, so that's great, but if you've got some, write them in. Now, you might say, where to from here? Okay, that sounds great, so forth, so on. How do I actually know how my organisation is travelling and where do I start in all this? Well, the very first thing you need to do is to get a handle on where your organisation is in relation to those frameworks that I showed you. You need to actually understand how closely aligned is my organisation to the traditional psychological contract, or how closely aligned are we to the new contract, which is of course conducive to an agile performance. So there's a bit of a process that works for you here. The first thing that you need to do, and certainly we can help you with this, is we need to define a workplace sample. We would suggest, and we're going to survey the organisation. We would suggest strongly that everybody get involved in this workplace sample. Most of these things are done online. We've got paper and pencil ones that can be done for workforce that might be a bit paranoid about using computers. Then we administer the survey. As I said, it's normally done online. It takes about 15 minutes to fill out. And what we're basically looking at is 80 statements around the 8 values that I went through with you on a productive workplace. So we're actually measuring people with 10 statements around the 8 values. So it's quite structured. Of course, they're randomized so that, you know, we don't have the labels on those values at the time we survey people. We then analyse the results, so we produce, and I'll show you an example of a couple of organisations. We give some examples of the results. Oh, sorry, we analyse the results, we produce a report. We then create a project team, and as I said to you before, why not create a project team which is a replica of the organisation? So we might have, say, 1 senior manager, 2 managers, maybe like 4 to 6 coordinators or supervisors, and maybe 8 workforce scattered across all the departments. So we get them all in a room, and it's basically a replica of the organisation. It is a bit difficult to actually create that, but once you've created it, it can be a really useful resource. So we've found in organisations that CEOs can bounce things off this project team that may not be related directly to the culture that I'm talking about. So we create the team, we develop the team, and basically that means that we do a bit of team building, because that project team is going to be involved in some serious discussions around how we might analyse results and improve our capacity to be more agile. So we develop the team. The team themselves develop a series of strategies. So, I might facilitate that process. They'd come up with a whole range of things, and they develop a a report, if you like. Normally that report will go to senior management, and the persons that will present to senior management is this project team, or at least some representatives of that. Once the project team receives this report, they will implement some of the strategies, obviously not all, but some, and be happy to do so. And the next step is in 12 months' time, we do the same survey again, so we can actually determine whether or not we've made any progress towards those 8 values of productive companies or organisations. So that's the methodology we use. Happy to talk with anyone offline who'd like to know more about that. Happy to talk about the process and how it works. Here's a couple of slides without going into great detail just before we finish up on a company or an organisation, where you'll notice up here we've got the actual values, the 8 values, and we've got what these circles represent without going into huge detail. This is top management, this is middle management, and this is workforce. So basically it's looking at the level of congruence between the 3 perspectives. We can look at it another way. Blue's good, red's not. So when you see a lot of red, that's not good. And you'll notice there we've got those 3 categories again: top management, middle management, workforce. Is exactly the same data as the previous slide, represented in a different way. And then it drills down into the particular statements. So in this case here, Q42, I recognise staff for great customer service. Top management, of which there are 4. The 2 says, yeah, I've done that. 1 says, can't be sure whether I've done that. They've gone neither, or maybe I have, but I don't do enough of it. And 1 says, no, I haven't. But it defaults to an agree. Middle management, 75% have agreed with that statement, because that would be the statement that they respond to. So both of those 2 would respond to that. Workforce, in this case we've got 233 workforce. They have, interestingly enough, it's defaulted to a neither, so they're not quite as positive about that. Now, what could be the explanation there? Well, of course, the statement that they're answering is, my boss has recognised staff in my team for great customer service. So they're looking at it from their perspective, but it's the same question. They're not quite as positive about that, so maybe it's been done but not done very well, or maybe it hasn't been done at all but the management think it's been done. And then we've got a split. You can actually look at the departments or the functional areas and see. So obviously in DS you've got probably the most positive result there on that statement. In others though, it's really non-committal. So we've got statistical data, and the project team will work through that data and come up with some recommendations without pointing fingers of blame at any particular department or part of the organisation. So guys, that's pretty much it. I've got a couple of questions here. Just quick plug, I've got heaps of free webinars that are now on the website. So if you go to my website, you can actually basically enroll in any of these. They're free of charge, as this one is, but just a quick plug to say that we've got those coming up, and you can see that there's one for every month of the year, so you just pick the ones that you're interested in. And I think finally I would just say to you that if you're interested in the book, and all the models and frameworks and things that I've gone through today are in great detail in this book, which is called Attracting and Retaining Talent. Happy to give you a 20% discount if you send me an email by close of business today. Happy to give you a 20% discount, which will bring the book down to $28. I'll sign it for you, and it's postage on top of that. So happy to do that. But let me answer some questions, because I can see that there's quite a few. So I just want to leave enough time. I've only got about 5 minutes, so I'll be fairly quick. Okay. First statement from Bron, if I may use the name. Love the idea of being in a project team, concurrently to your role, the opportunity to develop in other areas. Can you give an example of how the customer-centric model works for reporting lines, and who guides learning and development, replaces the traditional manager? Okay. Information is knowledge. How do you overcome the concern that initiative is a threat to your team? Okay, I think there's a couple of questions there. Look, the model that I went through before, who reports to whom, each of those concentric circles has an overall boss. So, for example, the frontline, and of course we're taking people out of each area because normally frontline is covering a whole range of departments, so they all work under the one. So they'll all have the different, they'll all be from different technical areas, but they'll all report to one boss in frontline. So there's a little bit of matrix involved in this too, and they'll also report to a functional manager. But the dominant person in this case will be the ones in the circles, not the functional. That's why I've depicted them in dotted lines. So I can talk to you a little bit more about that. The issue around the initiative paradox is, yeah, that's right. The traditional manager feels that you'll be told on a need-to-know basis. Look, I'll just make some comments about that, if I may. The fact of the matter is that we think that employees can't be trusted with information, or we don't want that to get in the way. And then we're expecting them to have the same perspective as us as leaders. It's not going to work. It won't happen. So we've got to actually give people more knowledge, and we've got to explain to them where the boundaries of initiative are. That's what I mean. And the way to do that is through critical incidents. So we use an example, a real-life example that's occurred, and we say, there's a critical incident. This is where are the boundaries around where we should be following rules and regulations and where should we be showing initiative. That's the fastest and most effective way. So instead of having a mindless reporting process that we normally have in our meetings, how about we would ask people to be short, sharp, to the point in their reports. Of course, you've got to have reports. But let's leave, say, 15 minutes of conversation around this issue that happened last week and what we can learn from it and where the boundaries are. Because once employees know where the boundaries are, they can be held accountable for that. But half the problem with people not showing initiative is because they're not sure whether they should show that boundary, should exercise that initiative, or the boss is not going to be able to step back. That's obviously a big issue as well. So I'm not sure I've completely answered that question, I think, but Win, I think it was, but I'm happy to answer that in more detail. Thank you for providing a potential strategy. Happy for that to occur. So that's pretty much all the questions we've got at this stage. I promised to finish on time, and I'll do that. If you want to chat with me offline, you've got my email address there. Please don't hesitate to contact me, and I'm happy to talk further. I will send you out a copy of this presentation, both in YouTube, which I'll upload, and also I'll give you the slides, so you can actually study this a bit further. So thank you very much for your involvement again, and thank you for those that have loyally, I use the word loyalty, or maybe I should say committed people who've come back time and time again. I very much appreciate that, and I hope you've got something useful out of it. Thank you very much.